Thank you all. Thank you so much. Please welcome Rabbi Joy Levitt.
Hi, everybody. First, I want to make it clear that I did not choose this outfit because it matches the seats. I think I just needed to say that right away. I didn't realize it.
Or
That being
didn't
said,
you?
it's kind of good, right?
Or didn't you? We can meditate on this for
Yes.
a while. I'm really excited to have this conversation, and we've never had this way.
Indeed.
I don't think you've led so many panels here
And have as have
moderated.
you.
And have been in conversation many times, but have never shared it. I want to start by asking you what resonated for you in this film.
You know, the Dalai Lama is not treated like a human being in Dharamsala. He's treated, I mean, they don't have really a concept of God, but, you know, he's holy, right? He's a holy, you don't actually ever refer to the Dalai Lama except as Your Holiness or His Holiness. We'll get into it later, but so what's so striking about this is how human he is and how human these are giants in our lives. These are particularly Desmond Tutu, for me, a giant in this anti-apartheid struggle, and yet they are very, very human and funny and ridiculous on some level, right? Like that laugh is just nuts, but it just makes him like a real person, and I think that's sort of the genius of the film, is that you really see these people's true humanity.
I think they tried. I think they tried to. They took a moment to really not just show them as people saying brilliant things,
right,
which I'm sure they do constantly, but also managed to really show them in their playfulness and everything else. I think that's really.
How about you? What did you think struck you?
I was struck by this notion of the connection to one another. And how much how important that is, and how that connected them constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very lonely, right? When you're at that place where the world expects so much of you, it's very hard to find people that you can just, well, I would say let your hair down, but that would be ridiculous. But where you can just be yourself. And so I felt also that sense of connection, even though the Dalai Lama is a Buddhist monk and he doesn't have those connections in the usual way that one does. And I think he could. One of the things that struck me is you generally don't touch the Dalai Lama. The katak, the white cloth that you saw being handed around, is so that you don't touch him. You hand it to him, he hands it back to you. I've never really understand this. It's the regifting
how you
thing.
avoid getting sick. It's great.
Perhaps. But I didn't. No, but I noticed that they were touching. I mean, they were really touching each other throughout. It was really physical, which is another thing that really struck me about the film, was how physical, particularly the Dalai Lama, was toward Desmond Tutu.
And it's amazing. He kept breaking the rules. They all kept breaking the rules.
Right.
he tasted the wine.
Right.
I mean, the little pinky, the bris
right,
wine.
Right.
They
The bris wine. Did he just say that?
They he did the dance. I think seeing that is seeing that that religion doesn't have to be as rigid and humanity comes first.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. They kept calling each other mischievous, but I think they both are. For instance, what was the point in which when the Dalai Lama was taking the Eucharist, right? Big no-no, and I'm sure he got plenty of flack for it, Tutu, on this, in the same way that the bris wine happened, right? But they were kind of like, we are in a space in which this isn't about us and our human-made rules. This is about something larger. There's something holy going on here, and who are we to deny the opportunity to share this? That was very profound to me.
So we're showing this at the Marlene Morrison JCC Manhattan. This is a Jewish community center. You're a rabbi here on the Upper West Side. What did you feel that was the message you would want to bring? Why is this an important film to show our community?
Well, I think that this issue of forgiveness and compassion is core to what this relationship is about and what each of their message is about, and it is the hardest thing in the world, right? It is the hardest thing. And it was sort of interesting because I bristled a little bit when I think Archbishop Tutu said something like, we are made to be compassionate, right? Things get screwed up, but that is our essential being, which I think is a very Jewish concept as well. We are all created in the image of God, right? We have that sense in us. And yet, being able to access it, instead of feeling scarcity, feeling abundance, instead of feeling, he's got what I want, and therefore, right? Just being able to have that default as compassion. I think the most interesting thing that they both said is this does not come naturally. Even though we have capacity, it is about practice. It is about work. And for the Dalai Lama, that's about 5 hours a day of meditation. Like His Holiness does not get to be His Holiness just because he happened to pick the comb and the hairbrush of the prior Dalai Lama who died at the exact moment that he died. I mean, there's a lot of woo-woo here, but just because he is that doesn't mean that he has at the ready that level of compassion. And I do actually think that for Judaism that also means a practice. I don't think you just get there. I think you practice compassion, and you work on it, and you practice forgiveness, and it doesn't come naturally. And in fact, I don't know if you want to jump to the dialogue.
Oh, the dialogue? The peace and reconciliation?
Oh,
no,
well, go ahead.
I was going to start with some, just a little bit about South Africa.
Yeah.
Because I think that connects very much to this. That was a very touching part of the film, just talking about peace and reconciliation and understanding what happened there in South Africa and what a brave choice that is to use that as a method instead of a trial like Nuremberg.
I mean, it's interesting that the Archbishop's daughter, who I thought was a star of this film, I thought she was really articulate. She described it as a compromise, and I don't know about you. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I didn't ever think of it that way. I thought of it as like this extraordinary gesture in the and I wonder whether Mandela would have said it was a compromise, or because I always thought it was, this is the only way we're going to move forward as a country is if we get people to admit what they did wrong, to feel remorse, and to move on. And actually, I think that process of what we would call tshuva, of repentance, is also very familiar to us as Jews. This requirement that in order to move forward, you actually have to confront yourself and what it is that you've done. You have to experience some private and public shame around that. You have to delineate, these are the things I did, not I was a jerk, not I was a murderer, but here are the 5 people I killed, and here are their names, right? And then ask for forgiveness. That's a process, and we Jews go through that process every Yom Kippur, and then we screw up, and then we, go through it again. It doesn't just happen. It was interesting to me that, as I recall, and somebody can correct me, there weren't a whole lot of people that got amnesty. I think there were thousands and thousands that requested it, and hundreds that actually measured up to, you've done the work, and we can see that you've done the work, and we forgive you.
So let's talk about your relationship and your connection to the Dalai Lama. Can you share a little bit of that history?
It's 31 years ago. That's intense. So
those pictures are still up in your office.
Good luck with my memory here. But I received a phone call on vacation, which in and of itself was unusual. And it was a guy named Dr. Mark Lieberman, who died sadly this year. And And he said, my name is Mark Lieberman. I'm an ophthalmologic surgeon from San Francisco, and I'm calling to invite you to spend a week in Dharamsala teaching Judaism to the Dalai Lama. Yeah, so I hung up. I mean, that is the literal truth. I thought it was a phony phone call. I thought it was like some friend of mine, like, pranking me out. And he called back, thank God, and said, wait, don't hang up. Blue Greenberg told me to call you. So for those of you who don't know, Blue Greenberg is a major Jewish Orthodox feminist, somebody that I knew, married to Yitz Greenberg, who's a prominent Orthodox thinker. And so that was sort of enough to make me think like, oh, this might be for real. But then he proceeded to give me some story that the Cummings Foundation was considering a grant to take 8 Jewish leaders to Dharamsala, India, to teach Judaism to the Dalai Lama. So, I mean, I was 37 years old. I had 2 small children. I was a congregational rabbi. I didn't know how to spell Buddhism, and I was not even sure why they were calling me. And so I kind of said, you know, I'll think about it, but I had no intention of thinking about it. And you may think that's weird, and even I, in the telling of it, think it was weird. But I went home, and I like was on the phone with my mother, and I told her this crazy story, and she said, "What do you mean you're not going? I'll move in. I'll take care of your children. Of course you're going." My mother's had, like, you know, basically raised me with pretty much benign neglect, but there were 3 or 4 moments in her life where she, like, went in for the kill, and trust me, if she were here, she would agree. But that was one of those moments, and so I kind of, like, you know, decided to call Blue and find out what this was all about. And Blue said to me that that the Dalai Lama was one of the very few world leaders that recognized the state of Israel, and so that's why she was going. And Yitz was going because he really thought he could help. And I should say that the reason we were being invited was that the Dalai Lama believed that the Jewish people had the answer to how to survive in diaspora. And he was in diaspora. He's in Dharamsala, India, away from Tibet, having fled Tibet, as you saw in 1959, from the Chinese takeover of his country. And he had a pilot who was Jewish and knew a little bit about Judaism from this extraordinary education that he had. And the pilot, Michael Saltman, knew one Jew, and that Jew was Mark Lieberman, and Mark Lieberman knew one Jew, and that was Moshe Waldox, and Moshe knew a lot of Jews. And so Moshe's a rabbi in Boston, and and they put together this group based on those that they thought could help the Dalai Lama live in diaspora until he could get back. What the basic question was, what is your secret, Jewish people? How are you managing to do this when you've lost your temple and you've lost your land? And so that was kind of, you know, okay, that sounds compelling. If I really am honest, I would say they had put together 7 people. They had money for 8, and they realized they only had 1 woman. And so they were kind of searching around for a woman, and I think they wanted somebody that was a congregational rabbi, which is what I was at the time. And fate, luck, karma, who knows? I was asked, and so I went.
And what did you learn?
What did I learn?
In a nutshell.
You know, on the 7th floor here is a meditation space, and that meditation space is here because of that trip. Because at the end of the dialogue, and I should say that each of us was given the freedom to talk about whatever we wanted with His Holiness. That it was entire. Let me back up a little bit. The trip had Yitz, Blue, myself, Moshe Waldox, Nathan Katz, who is a professor of Tibetan studies in Florida. Somebody count, that's 5. Paul Mendes-Floor, who was the leading expert, and Martin Buber, who was coming from Israel. This is going to come. Zalman, thank you. My husband. Zalman Schachter, at the time Zalman Schachter, who was, the leading neo-Hasidic rabbi of our time. The 8th person will come to me. Zalman and Yitz were clearly the elder statesmen of this group and had kind of all the power, and yet they were exact opposites. Zalman was a neo-Chassid. Yitz is I don't know what you'd call him, but a centrist, orthodox, important rabbi of our time. So there was a lot of wrestling for authority and power in this little group of 8, and there were all of these assaults on different people's perspective about what was halachic, what was legally permissible. So Yitz worried a lot about walking into what you saw, the temple, because Jews don't do that, right? And here was a great moment. Jews don't call anybody Your Holiness except God, right? So Zalman was not at all troubled by this. Zalman was in a state of euphoria for the entire time we were there. But Yitz was very, very troubled by and there's a protocol there. I was not troubled because if you tell me that's what I have to do, that's what I have to do. I don't ascribe, just because this person's name is Your Holiness doesn't necessarily mean I believe that he is like God. That's his name, Your Holiness. I was fine with it. But Yitz was very, very worked up about it and we spent hours processing all of this, much to the frustration of Mark Lieberman and the other people that were planning this trip who were like, can't you just get over yourselves? But what it means is to take a religion seriously, and they do, all of them did, is to really struggle with these issues. So here's what the compromise was. Yitz was given the Tibetan translation of Your Holiness, so he said it in Tibetan. Okay, worked for him. Our handlers thought that was, completely ridiculous, but it worked for him. Every morning, we davened, in the Conga Valley, overlooking the Conga Valley. It was like this beautiful setting. There were 10 of us. Blue and I were the 2 women. There were 6 other men on the trip, and then there were reporters that were with us. Well, or a reporter, Roger Kamenetz, who wrote the book *The Jew and the Lotus*, which is the book about this trip, and Mark Lieberman. So, is there a minion here? Well, it kind of depends, right? So there were 10 Jews there, and then there were 2 what you would call Jew boos, right? So they were born Jewish, but they didn't really consider themselves Jewish. So there was a very interesting moment here where the rabbi and the Jewish PhD feminists are not counted in the minyan that Buddhists who were born Jewish are counted in the minyan. That was a painful moment, I would say, and it was kind of a struggle. Yitz really tried, he kind of worked on it, but it was always a little bit tense, I think, there. So at the end of so I chose to talk about the synagogue, frankly it could be the community center as well, as a response to diaspora fragmentation. We lose everything. We lose the temple. We lose the sacrificial cult. We lose everything in 70 of the Common Era. And yet we survive. Why do we survive? Because we put study and community at the center, not real estate and buildings. And that was sort of my big message to him, His Holiness. I had asked my Hebrew school kids to give me letters. What should I tell the Dalai Lama about the importance of Judaism. And I have a book. I have it upstairs. I gave him, His Holiness, the book, but I have Xerox of it. And one kid said, Dear Dolly, she was 12. The secret is that we kept our people together. And he started to cry. I mean, it was a really incredible moment there. The last thing that happened was that Nathan Katz, or somebody on the trip, I think it was Nathan, said, Dharamsala is this place that a lot of American Jews go to seek holiness. They don't find it in Judaism, and they go there. Israelis go trekking, all kinds of places, and they go to Dharamsala. It's one of them. And so Nathan said, there are a lot of Jews up here. We want you to send them home. And it was like a chutzpahdik comment, like really, you're giving instructions to the Dalai Lama? And he laughed. He spent a lot of the week laughing. And he laughed, and he said, well, of course I'm going to send them home. They're not Buddhists. They're Jewish. But if you don't figure out what to do with them, they're going to come back. And that's how come we have a meditation center here at the JCC. Because we noticed that lots of Jubus, Buddhists, lots of Jews could not quiet their minds in synagogues. Too many words they don't understand, too much judgment, too much, am I allowed to come in? Do I have to pay to come in? All the things that we know about synagogues that are troubling. And so they were happily meditating in Buddhist spaces all over the city. And so, we noticed that, and we also noticed that in this crazy world we live in, just the ability to quiet the mind is a great gift. And that's how come Makom started. And I guess that was perhaps the biggest lesson that I learned. I will say, on Shabbos afternoon, we had a luncheon, and we invited the monks and the lamas and the nuns, the sort of clergy around him, to join us. And and all the Israelis, and poor Blue was like very worried about all, because many of these nuns and monks were born Steinberg and Goldstein, and now are celibate, shaven-haired. It's very dislocating. And Blue only wanted to call their parents to, they're fine, they're eating, and she couldn't write anything down because it was Shabbat. But I had this very interesting conversation with one of the nuns who said, was born in LA, Jewish, and said she went to her rabbi when she was 16 and said, what happens when you die? And her rabbi said, you're dead. And she became a Buddhist because that was just not an answer that she could find fulfilling. And what was startling about this conversation was I too went to my rabbi when I was 16 and said, what happens when you die? And he said, you're dead. So pay attention to your life right now. And that's how come I'm a rabbi. And it was really startling to see how the same answer could be, heard in such different ways. I would end, and then you will probably want to open this up. I think the thing that really struck me about the movie was this idea of the relationship of joy and purpose. And I sort of feel like that's what this building has been about, certainly for me in the last 20 years that it's been here, in the last 25. It's that if you can help people find purpose and meaning in their lives, either through connection to one another, to their deepest selves, or to something in our tradition, purpose is what drives happiness. And I heard so much of that there.
Thank you. We have time for make the community a part of this conversation.
What struck me was something that my grandmother said when we were on a trip once to my aunt. She said, I probably will not see you again, right? Because she had a sense of her own death. But I wanted to tell you, thank you. And what struck me about this film was that I felt like this to them might have been the last time that they were seeing one another.
Sure. Yeah.
And I through that lens, the touching, the laughter, the let me tell you this, let me make sure you know this, became really evident. And I just wanted to share that.
I mean, His Holiness is also not well. So it was sort of interesting to see that.
I mean, that moment when they talk to each other about how they're going to remember each other on their deathbeds. I mean, that's just, they are there forever. They are in that moment that they're having there will be a part of them forever.
I'll just say, go ahead. I'm curious, how did Yitz interact with you as a woman rabbi?
I mean, Yitz has deep respect for women in the rabbinate. Otherwise he couldn't be married to Blue. I think that he's, certainly 30 years ago, he was truly struggling with how to. He always called me Rabbi Levitt in any public, forum that we were in, and he's deeply respectful of it, even though, there are things that his halachic system just doesn't permit. I respected that.
I've discovered relatively late that there's a great joy in connecting with people, and it could be just for a moment. It could be for an extended period of time. It could be, it's like a lot of it's about curiosity about other people, and it could be at a bus stop, just for a couple of minutes, and walk away where everybody is the people you're connecting with. It just takes.
Have you noticed that that's even more true during COVID? Because I have.
Well, I just started noticing it really, and it's like I discovered that just to make a little comment or just ask a simple question, and you'll find out quickly who wants to talk, and many, many people do want to talk. And once you start doing that, for me anyway, there's a tremendous joy in that connection. So I just wanted to just share that because I saw that in the.
Yeah, no, my husband does not leave a taxi without saying, "Have a good day." And it seems like a kind of throwaway line, but it actually, you can see how significant it is that you're treating this other person like a person, not just somebody that's getting you from one place to another.
We run through the city constantly in this isolated sense, and that's what I love about the JCC, that it's a community center where we take a moment to be a community. Last comment. A lot of pressure.
Well, thank you for everything. I do meditate for 25 years, but in an Indian philosophy. But what struck me is that the Dalai Lama had said that he meets everyone at the human level. And of course we know all that, or we try and see the person in front of us as ourselves. But the fact that that baseline was humanity, as opposed to seeing anything else, was also very telling. So I thought it was exceptional. Thank you.
Folks, thank you so much, Joy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing
Yitzi.
this. And thank you for everything you've done for us.
Thank you.